eldest siblings, Kuki, Naga, and Meitei origins. According to Hudson and indigenous traditions, far preceding colonial borders, state frameworks, or religious divisions that now encircle the northeast region of India, the mountains and valleys were home to people whose origins were fused in oral tales, communal rituals, and shared memories. Among them, the Kukis, Nagas, and Meiteis are preeminent ethnic groups in current-day Manipur and the surrounding areas. Though their modern-day identities are separate, sometimes even antagonistic, there are a number of early colonial ethnographers, particularly T.C. Hodson, and oral histories based in Manipur that imply that they were all members of the same lineage. Most importantly, conventional accounts, validated by anthropological research, suggest a temporal sequence in their dispersal. The Kukis as the oldest, the Nagas as the second, and the Meiteis as the youngest of the three. The stratified arrival goes some way towards explaining the intricate relationship between the groups and the centuries-long gradual formation of multifarious identities. Kuki, the eldest children of the hills. Of the three, Kukis are popularly considered to be the oldest people of the area. Their tradition centers around the legend of Khul cave, that is the purportedly original habitation from where all human existence began. According to Kuki tradition, they emerged first from the cave, thus having their early dispersal over the hills and highlands of modern Myanmar, Manipur, Mizoram, Tripura, Assam, and even Bangladesh. T.C. Hodson, in the Meiteis, 1908, indirectly alludes to this lineage when he observes that the Meiteis and the Hill, tribes broadly referred to by him as Old Kukis, must have had common origins but diverged over time. Hodson presents the Kukis as one of the most ancient races of the hills and adds that their customs of migrating and settling are older than those of the Nagas and the lowland Meiteis. British officers such as G.A. Grierson and Alexander Mackenzie also classified the Kukis as belonging to an earlier stock, predating the arrival or the emergence of other communities. Kukichin languages such as Tharu, Hamar, Pait, Simte, etc., linguistically are one of the oldest stocks of the Tibeto-Burman language family in the region. Their chieftainship tradition, autonomous village system, and general presence on the Indo-Myanmar border long before the emergence of Meitei, monarchical or Naga federations reaffirm the case for the Kukis being the oldest group. Naga, the second wave, carefully trailing the Kukis in this ancestral migration, are the Naga tribes, which are a loose confederation of ethnic groups, including the Angami, Ao, Tangkhul, Zeliangrong, and Lotha. Similar to the Kukis, most Naga communities also have cave origin myths and subscribe to an ancestral home in the east, perhaps in the current Chin Hills or Yunnan province of China. A number of Tangkhul and Zeliangrong folk traditions account for migration following the departure of an earlier group most commonly understood to be the Kukis from, a shared origin point. Sequential emergence, initially the Kukis, later the Nagasis, a common theme in regional comparative mythology. Although Hodson does not give a direct ranking of these groups chronologically, his report of linguistic, ritualistic, and cultural affinities implies that Nagas were a later group who took the same path of migration but at a later date. By the time the Naga tribes inhabited the hills and upland ridges of present-day Nagaland and northern Manipur, the Kukis had already settled all over the region. In spite of this, the two sections have much in common socio-culturally: clan systems of government, animist practices, and warrior traditions. Naga identity only coalesces into a pan-tribal nationalism movement with the coming of British categorization and Christian missionary activity, especially in the 20th century. Meitei, the youngest of the siblings. The Meiteis are the youngest of the three groups, both culturally and chronologically in terms of settlement. According to Hodson, in his research, the Meiteis were initially hill tribes who came down into the Imphal Valley and over time formed their own distinct identity. He contends, there are indications that the Meiteis were originally hill tribes who came down into the valley and adopted Hinduism, thus differentiating themselves from their brethren in the hills. This fall from the hills comes as part of Ningthuja clan oral traditions, the Manipur ruling dynasty who practiced animism originally and had close connections to the hill tribes prior to adopting Vaishnavite Hinduism in the 18th century with King Pamheba, Garib Navas. It was their development into a royal, Hindu-governed state that represented a turning point in Meitei identity. Based on researchers such as Dr. R. Brown and G.A. Grierson, the Meiteis' evolution into a valley civilization was fairly recent, presumably after the Kukis and Nagas had already developed themselves in the peripheral highlands. Meitei language, is Tibeto-Burman, but has acquired numerous Indo-Aryan influences, particularly after interaction with Bengali and Sanskrit sources. Further, Meitei origin myths-like the origin of their god Pakhangba and the legend of Nongda Laren Pakhangba, the earliest historic Kingar, invariably associated with hilltop residences and serpent cults, once more evoking a historical past sunk deep in the hills, much like Kuki and Naga mythology. A shared mythology and diverging paths. Though with differences that evolved over centuries, all three, namely Kukis, Nagas, and Meiteis, have similar mythological motifs: emergence from caves, worship of nature, headhunting culture, and clan-centric society. All the myths of Kuki Chongthu, Naga Moyon, and Meitei Pakhangba illustrate earliest movements from the east or underworld caves, representing emergence into the world of civilization. Hodson's comparative analysis of Meitei rituals like Lai Haroba Festival in honor of ancestral gods bears remarkable similarity with Kuki, Chavangkut, and Naga seed-sowing festivals, all revolving around farm life and ancestor worship. The similarities lend further weight to the argument of a common origin, as much as political organization, religious evolution, and historical events drove the groups apart. Colonial classification and ethnic fixation. The British colonial officials were primarily responsible for ossifying these identities. They placed the Meiteis as civilized Hindus of the valley and put Kukis and Nagas into the group of wild tribes of the hills. These administrative categorizations established artificial partitions that entrenched ethnic divisions, even though there was a common ancestry underlying. The Kuki Rebellion, 1917-1919. Formation of the Naga Club, 1918. And eventually the Meitei Hindu revival were all instigated within a colonial framework that entrenched these divisions. But British authors such as Hodson and Brown were often at pains to tell readers that the differences which appeared between these groups were a product of time and outside influence, not natural hostility or dissociation. Implications for today? In contemporary times, ethnic conflicts and rival political movements have strained relations between the Kukis, Nagas, and Meiteis. Calls for separate homelands, autonomy, and recognition usually obscure the fundamental historical ties that once brought these people together. Going back to the notion that the Kukis are the oldest among them, then the Nagas, and finally the Meiteis, presents not only an anthropological accuracy, but a reminder of common roots. While contemporary identities have to be honored, recalling these deeply rooted bonds can foster understanding and exchange. As brothers and sisters of the same family, cave Khul, or otherwise, these groups share more than they tend to appreciate. Conclusion. As per indigenous folklore as well as colonial accounts such as those by T.C. Hodson, the Kukis are the senior-most settlers, appearing earliest out of the cradle of ancestors and settling in the hills. The Nagas came next, with similar origins but developing separate tribal identities, spread out through the mountain ranges. The Meiteis, last in the trio, moved down from the hills to the valley, embracing Hinduism and monarchy, and developed into a centralized state. This temporal sequence, Kuki, Naga, Meiteis, not merely a curiosity of history. It is a possible way to reconciliation, appealing to an understanding of ethnic identities as facets of the same human narrative and not rivals in a game where there is zero-sum game. In accepting the Kukis as the elder brothers, we also acknowledge the fullness and richness of their past role as the shapers of the cultural texture of Northeast India. Disclaimer: the article is based on historical accounts, oral histories, and colonial ethnography. It does not exclude any group's identity or politics in the present. It is an attempt to present a wider historical context for grasping common roots between the Kukis, Nagas, and Meiteis,